Ralph Simon, a personal and professional mentor to me, said, the music industry is a restless beast. We're always asking what's happening next. We always have been. And it's the point about we always have been asking what's happening next, which fascinates me. And I think that's really, really important. We're always seeking what's happening. We're always the first to suffer from disruption. We're always the first to recover from disruption. And that makes the people that work in this business so fascinating. If I hop, skip and jump to the last words of my book, Tarzan Economics, retitled Pivot, it says, don't wait for your job description, create your job description. I have never once in my entire life applied to a job advert. And that's what I was doing. I was interviewing with anyone and everyone who would consider the role of an economist in the music industry, because there was none. I was the first. I'm still the only one. I'm a monopoly. I should be smashed up into pieces.
Do you think which one comes first? Does the creativity drive the economics,
Yes.
or does the economics drive the creativity?
I believe the creativity drives economics. I really do, and it has to stay that way.
Welcome to Tileyard, The Secret Sauce, the podcast that brings you behind the scenes at Europe's largest creative community. I'm your host, Nick Keynes, and each episode we'll be chatting with the game changers, disruptors, and innovators who are shaping the future of the music industry right here at Tileyard. Get ready for some incredible stories and inspirational characters. Let's go.
Will Page, economist, writer, a mystic, you could say, someone who can predict the future. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great.
Thank you. It's great getting here. I travelled all the way up 40 steps to get here. It took best part of 60 seconds. But
well, it was
worth the trip.
The show's all about speaking to people in the community. You know, we've known each other a long time now, and we've had so many great chats. But there's a lot about you I probably don't know, and I'm looking forward to finding out. But I always sort of start these with going back to the beginning. So there's a little bit of, I detect a slight twang. There's a Scottish accent there. So you're from Dunbar, I believe.
Yeah, my parents are just a few miles north of the English border. So we actually get off the train at Berwick upon Tweed in England and jump across the line to Scotland, which made lockdown interesting because you had two different sets of rules. But yeah, I grew up in Edinburgh, studied at Glasgow, graduated from a master's from Edinburgh University, and moved down to London in 2006, just before the financial crisis. So you can blame all that on me.
Fantastic. So I assume with what you now do that you studied economics at uni?
Yeah, I did economics as an undergraduate, which I like to say is where you get away with writing essays and drawing pretty charts. And then I went back to Edinburgh to do my master's, where you actually have to do the maths. And my first lecture, I looked at this lecture board and saw all these D symbols and asked a colleague, what do the D stand for? And he whispered in my ear, that's called calculus, Will. And I realised just how out of depth I was mathematically. But that was a great achievement, getting the Masters in Economics from Edinburgh.
It's funny, one of the things I was most worried about with this podcast, because I know you well, is being able to keep up with you, because you've got a ridiculous brain. It's kind of why you're so well known. It's interesting, when we first met, the thing that resonated with me is you actually pronounced my name right. I've been Keynes my whole life, but you called me Keynes, which is how it should be pronounced. Yeah. And I always pretended that I was a descendant of John Maynard Keynes, who some people might have heard of if they're into economics, but sadly that wasn't true. It didn't reflect in my performance. Well, I did economics at uni as well.
Oh, fantastic.
And I wasn't very good, so I tried to do something else, music.
I always like to say 2 economists, 3.14 opinions.
Exactly. So economics, that was a major part of your life. What was the influence for that? Was it just something you were good at, something you were interested in? Yeah,
it's my father, to be honest with you. My father taught maths and economics at a very rough school in the west of Edinburgh, a place called Broxburn. How rough was it? It's where Susan Boyle went to school. It was that rough. And he was just an incredible inspiration for me to see how he took kids from really, really bad upbringings and a really rough background and gave them skills to apply when they left school, whether they wanted to go to university or go into employment. You need economics. And he always said to me that the key to teaching economics is to focus on audiences who, A, don't think they're going to understand it, B, don't want to understand it, but C, have to. So going back to your wonderful introduction, when people are nervous about sitting with an economist, I get it. My job is to get that message across without crossing over. How do you make people laugh and learn at the same time is a technique I often use using comedy. Not that you ever laugh at my jokes, but still
occasionally will.
Trying to make the language of economists digestible to an audience who desperately need to understand trade-offs and incentives. Economics is common sense made complicated. I try and make it common sense again.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, obviously you've made your name in mixing something that you have a passion for and you were influenced by your father with music, something else that I presume that you are deeply passionate about.
Yeah, and maybe I could just recollect the best lesson my father ever taught me, because it applies to music. So forgive me while I digress a little here, but When I was 11 years old, my dad taught me to teach economics, not just to understand it, but how to communicate it. So from a very early age, to understand how you can use this subject, this method of abstraction, to help others. And the story goes back to me and my father at this beach called Pease Bay, which is just north of the English border. A big surfing beach now. You know, we were there in our trunks as kids, but now it's big guys in thick
Stunning
wetsuits.
part of the world, yeah.
And I said to my dad, you've taught my brother what economics is. My older brother, Tom, far brainier than me. You have to teach me. Sibling rivalry. I need to catch up. And he said to me, no, son, I'm on my holidays. I said, Dad, you got to teach me what economics is. You can't teach Tom and not teach me. And he said, piss off, son, I'm on my holidays. I said, Dad, please. He said, okay, we're at this beach and I'm going to give you a scenario. I'm going to tell you a bad news story and you're going to be the Prime Minister. So, Nick, you're going to be my Prime Minister. He said, last year, 23 children drowned in British beaches. Tragically, fatally, terrible. And Nick, you're going to be the Prime Minister, just like he said to me, and you're going to walk out of number 10 Downing Street, face grieving parents, hostile politicians, and an angry press in the face, and announce a policy solution to children drowning in British beaches. He put me on the spot and said, you have to say something which solves this problem. Now I was 11. You're very young and healthy looking, but you're not 11. What would you do in that situation if you were put on the spot?
You're not supposed to be asking me questions, well, it's the other way around.
This is very important.
What a difficult one. You can't promise that it'll never happen again, I guess.
What can you do?
Well, I think show compassion.
And what can you do beyond compassion? What policy initiative could you think of? What intervention could you give to stop British kids drowning in British beaches?
Well, maybe have lifeguards, maybe.
That's a good one.
You know?
That's a good one. So I was 11. My solution was make swimming compulsory. Good, right?
Yeah.
If we make swimming compulsory, no kids will drown. So then my dad said to me, okay, son, that's politics. Let's do some economics. What do we know about what happened? Kids drowned, Dad, and that makes me sad. Okay, where were they? They were at the beach, Dad. What were they doing at the beach? They were swimming, Dad. What does that tell you about their ability to swim or not? That meant they could swim because kids who can't swim don't go into water. What's my policy going to do? Increase the number of kids who can swim. So will we have more or less children swimming in British beaches as a result of my policy? We'll have more, Dad. And then will we have more or less deaths as a result of my policy? Penny drops. We'll have more, Dad. And it's the unintended consequences is what's beautiful about economics. I wanted to make the situation better, but as a result of my actions, I was about to make the situation worse. And from that day onwards, I constantly was fascinated in the method of abstraction when you're solving problems. Now, to join the story of me, an 11-year-old kid, to where we are today at the hub of the British music industry here at Tileyard, when I moved to the PRS, the Performing Rights Society, to start as the Chief Economist in 2006, the General Counsel of the PRS, the top lawyer of copyright in this country, asked me the same question. And I told her the same story. And she put down her knife and fork when we were having lunch, and I explained how making swimming compulsory would have made the problem worse. And she said to me, Will, I'd have just banned the kids from swimming. You can't ban children from swimming. That's not going to work. And if you think about where the music industry was at that point, you can't ban kids from getting music from the internet because that's not going to work either. You need different solutions for different problems. It's a very interesting way of thinking about how to use economics as an 11-year-old kid at the beach with my father, but also in solving what my problem was, which was music piracy.
Yeah, interesting. What a great story. That's what I love about you. You tell these stories so well, and in a way that it's engaging and it's understandable and it's interesting and sparks more thoughts.
Yeah.
So off the back of that, music. So you ended up in, as you said, PRS was your first. Was that sort of mid-noughties?
2006 is where I moved to the PRS.
Was that a conscience? Were you consciously looking for opportunities in the music industry at that point?
Yes. If I hop, skip and jump to the last words of my book, Tarzan Economics, retitled Pivot, it says, don't wait for your job description, create your job description. I have never once in my entire life applied to a job advert. I know what I've got.
I think I can relate
and I want
to
to offer it, Nobody who actually says, I'm looking for this person to do this job knows what they want them to do. Once you're inside the hood of a company, you work out what needs to get done. So don't wait for the description, create the description. And that's what I was doing. I was interviewing with anyone and everyone who would consider the role of an economist in the music industry because there was none. I was the first. I'm still the only one. I'm a monopoly. I should be smashed up into pieces. And I was getting nowhere. I remember interviewing with Sony in New York in 2005. And they said to me, what's the biggest threat to this company that you know of? And I said, I've just seen it in your reception. Because Sony Music was obviously worried about piracy. Sony hardware devices were promoting laptops with the words rip, mix and burn to commit piracy. That interview lasted 3.5 minutes.
Ironic, yeah.
I was asked to leave. But then it's a bizarre story, and I get goosebumps telling you this, but in March the 16th, 2006, I was on the 35 bus in Edinburgh going back home, and I picked up a Financial Times on the bus. Don't usually pick up newspapers on buses. It's an FT. Benefits outweigh the costs. And I'm flicking through it, and as the bus comes towards the end, just towards getting off to get home, I see this article which says, digital ants wreck the music industry's picnic. Wow, that's what I'm working on. How digital music is upending the entire business. Who wrote it? Adam Singer, Chief Executive of the Performing Rights Society. What do those people do? Now, if I go back to my father again, he always raised the four of us to never be shy approaching anyone. It could be the Queen, it could be a big issue seller. The worst I can say is bog off. So I wrote him a letter correcting some of the mistakes in his article. And 3 weeks later, he called me in the office in the Scottish government where I was working and said, hi, Will, Adam Singer here. Oh my God, very important CEO. He said, firstly, I want to thank you for those corrections. I thought he'd be angry at me. He said, I'm dyslexic, so your corrections make sense now. He said things like, when you have an increase in supply, barriers to entry fall. I said, no, Adam, if you use that speech again, you have to say, when the barriers to entry fall, then you can have an increase in supply, a classic dyslexic mistake.
Yeah.
And he brought me to London and interviewed me all day about how would you work here, and asked me questions about how would you price a music catalogue. I don't know, but I know how to design an auction. It's like, I don't think in 70 years we've ever thought about auction design for pricing music. These types of questions. Went back to Scotland. I was speaking to my sister Annie thinking, this interview, Annie, I think we got something. And 48 hours later, I was made the Chief Economist of the PRS.
Well, again,
Had I
brilliant.
not picked up that newspaper on that bus, I would not be sitting here with Nick Keynes today.
Well pronounced. What a story. I mean, it's interesting. We talk a lot about serendipity.
Yeah.
And, sliding doors and, hitting a crossroads and which way do we go, left or right?
Thanks to our main sponsor, TYX Studios. Based here in the heart of Tileyard, if you're looking for an amazing place to record your podcast, Jack and the team have everything that you need. They built some top-notch podcast, music, photography and content studios that are perfect for bringing your ideas to life. Plus, they offer memberships so you can get the most out of their beautiful co-working spaces too. Check them out at tyxstudios.com to see what they're all about. Big shout out to Jack and everyone at the TYX Studios for supporting us on our journey.
So you got the job at the PRS. So,
Yeah.
so what was did you go in there with a personal kind of ambition, a mandate, or but what was the kind of the mindset when you got that job?
Again, I had to create the description. Adam Singer just really believed that this business was falling apart. We were shedding billions in revenue. We were spending millions on litigation. The ratio didn't work. If you go back to piracy, just
So I was going to
briefly,
say the issue was piracy at that time, right? Yeah.
Chapter
Killing
1,
the industry.
Chapter 2, Chapter 10, all people discuss is piracy. And if you think about the word copyright, you can see why. Copyright, if we think about the syntax of that word, means the right to control copying. What the internet did was remove that right to control copying. It upended the word copyright and the industry that was built off. And nobody had a solution. All we had was litigation, suing consumers, suing websites, suing telco providers. Lawyers were making a fortune, but the business was dying. And I knew that path was going to result in the end of the music industry. And I was brought into the PRS to think differently. Just whatever they're doing, don't follow the flock of the sheep at the moment. You're going to be the black sheep and go in a different direction. And that was my job, avoiding getting sacked, dealing with inconvenient truths, and teaching economics to a business that had never thought about trade-offs or incentives before. And perhaps one of the most famous examples of that work was when I got to work with Radiohead on In Rainbows. Radiohead's In Rainbows was a revolution. I mean, it still is one of the most revolutionary marks in the music industry, where they allowed their fans to volunteer, pay what you want, a tip jar model to get the digital file in Rainbows. Followed subsequently by a deluxe vinyl box set, followed then by being launched on iTunes for the first time, and followed then by being a CD, which got to number 1 in 26 countries. So there's 4 ways to get 10 songs of In Rainbows. But there was a 5th, piracy. We showed that stealing illegally was way more popular than taking it for free legally.
In one of 4 ways, yeah.
And this is 2007, the dark days of the music industry. And the key lesson there is, if your viewers have a keyboard in front of them, which is quite likely, they'll see the words QWERTY, QWERTY, a deliberately inefficient layout of a keyboard designed to slow secretaries down so they'd make fewer mistakes. We use QWERTY keyboards. Our children and our grandchildren will use QWERTY keyboards. We always do what we've always done. We had piracy since 1999. I remember at university using Winamp every day. Shouldn't say that on the record. We always do what we've always done. So even when you drop the price of copyright to 0, people still went to BitTorrent to steal. And that's such an important lesson, which was game over, lawyers. We cannot pursue this legal route anymore. We have to come up with an economic solution.
And what was that? Was that a solution that you were? Did you find the answer?
Well, back then, it's also working with Radiohead around the summer of 2007 was when I first met Daniel Ek, who had hair at the time. That's how old my Spotify years are. But I remember a very distinct conversation I had with him at Soho House on the rooftop, where we both agreed nobody is stealing music because they hate copyright. No one is downloading music illegally because they want to stick it to the man. They're doing so because it's more convenient. It's more convenient than using clunky DRM files on iTunes or going to that place called a record shop to buy a CD where you snap your nails to open the case. It's more convenient. Convenience is winning. So what needs to be done is to build something that's more convenient than stealing. And that something, Nick, is Spotify.
Interesting. Obviously, economics can get very, very complex. And as you say, there can be some really very, very tricky maths in there. A lot of what you're saying actually is just common sense, right? Well, it could be construed as common sense or genius.
Yeah, there's a great expression which goes, you can bring a horse to water or water to the horse. Don't ask those kids who are on Napster and Winamp downloading music illegally to come back to buying CDs. They won't. They won't ever. That's never going to happen. Instead, wrap a business model around what they're currently doing.
So in terms of change, I mean, obviously this industry's been, going back to my day, the joke is I never mentioned the band I used to be in called Ultra, but I do mention it all the time.
I preferred your earlier stuff.
Did you? My original solo album. I mean, back in our day, it was demo tape, get a manager, get a record deal, put a record out, get it on radio, you've had a hit, you're successful.
Sure.
To a point, and then there's different levels of success. In terms of the way that the industry's changed, I mean, back in the mid-noughties, of course, when we've got, piracy was the big threat. We sort that out. We get streaming services. The industry is in rude health in the teens. Mm-hmm. What do you think the biggest threat is now? I mean, is it AI? Is it a combination of things? Is it competition from other things that are even more convenient?
I don't think it's AI. I think the AI threat is a bit overblown. I'd like to take a minute to explain why. If I use the simple economics of supply and demand, is there a risk that there is a huge supply of AI music onto streaming platforms? Yes, I accept that. And if we go back to the birth of this hysterical debate, as I call it, it was a fake Drake track. And if you remember the headlines, fake Drake track on Spotify gets 20 million streams, now removed by the record labels. Just 2 very quick points in it. Firstly, 20 million streams is not a lot of streams. The incredible artists you have housed in this wonderful campus of creativity called Tileyard, they beat 20 million streams in a week, easily, each of them. So 20 million is not a lot of streams. The second point's a little bit more technical. I ran a query inside Spotify to look at how many people, unique people with pulses, humans for a change, generated those 20 million streams. That's 20 million people. The point being, nobody streamed it more than once. And that's crucial. Everybody went to the song, sitting there, and went back to human beings with human creativity. So I understand why lawyers are worried about the supply of AI music. My question mark is, show me the demand.
That's a brilliant answer. I guess humans have taste, one would hope.
Yeah.
I mean, you've talked about creativity, and you've been very kind about Tileyard, so thank you for that. There was a point in your life, I guess, where the reason you end up in the music business in the first place. Are you a creative? Or are you just an admirer of great music? What brought you here?
I feel nervous calling myself a creative here at Tileyard, knowing who my neighbours are. Some of the most creative people in the country decide to come to this cluster of Tileyard. So I'm not sure whether I merit that word, but I would say that in terms of my creative achievements, and I would give credit to the teams that helped produce them, I created my first documentary, which came out about 7-8 years ago, called Black Stars of High Life, championing the rise, fall and resurgence of Ghanaian high life music, a beautiful time signature where it goes. Like this incredible time signature that goes with high life music, and watching how festivals across Europe are booking these Ghanaian artists who are in their 60s, 70s or 80s to perform again. And then perhaps from documentary making to music making, last year I was the #1 DJ worldwide on Mixcloud with 2023 Believe in Humanity. It's an annual project for me that I've been doing since puberty, mixtape culture, and this year getting to 54,000 unique people on Mixcloud. No bots, has to be said, but more importantly, Carole King, possibly the greatest songwriter alive today, gave me the introduction speech to the mix as well. So whilst most of my work is rows and columns of spreadsheets and contracts, 80%, there's that 20% which still has that creative juice.
Brilliant. That's what's lovely about these conversations, is often you learn stuff that you didn't know. I did know that. I was privileged enough to have discussed that with you previously, but I'm sure lots of people don't know that. So do you think that mix of, obviously you've got a great brain and you're creative, is that something that you think has given you a bit of an edge in what you do? Do you think, and an understanding and an empathy?
Yeah, I think on the run up to Spotify going public, I remember the CFO giving me my job description, which was help me see around corners and don't FUCK up. Okay. Yeah. And I think whether you're working in economics or you're working in music or you're trying to merge the two, which is what my job is, you're always trying to help people see around corners. Ralph Simon, a personal and professional mentor to me, said, the music industry is a restless beast. We're always asking what's happening next. We always have been. And it's the point about we always have been asking what's happening next, which fascinates me. And I think that's really, really important. We're always seeking what's happening. We're always the first to suffer from disruption. We're always the first to recover from disruption. And that makes the people that work in this business so fascinating. So if I can join the dots between music side of the brain and the economic side of the brain, then you can create something very special.
That's brilliant. I mean, we often talk about people at Tileyard being disruptors, but positive disruptors. People that say, you know what, you don't need to do it like that. Let's have a look at different ways of doing things. I mean, you touched on your conversation with Daniel Ek when you're at PRS. That led to an amazing role at Spotify as Chief Economist. So how long was that relationship? How long did that develop before you then got offered that opportunity?
So if you take it from 2007 to 2012, I'm at the PRS and pretty much became my full-time job working how to fit a square peg into a round hole. That is, how do you fix the conventional world of music licensing? We license the BBC, we license CD sales, and wrap it around this thing called streaming. You're wanting to do what? For a flat fee, access every song on the planet? I mean, now it's second nature. Back then, you're lost in translation trying to convince that. So bringing the water to the horse and building an economic case for licensing streaming was key. Throughout that whole journey, I'd been working with all the streaming services, but Spotify especially. And I really owe a huge chunk of my career to Nicholas Everson and Petra Hansen, who were the dynamic duo who did the licensing. They were featured in the Netflix drama The Playlist. And they kept saying, we have an economist in London, this Scottish economist, who's using the arguments we want to use. ARPU, the average person in Britain was spending £50, £60 a year on CDs. That's 2 or 3 for yourself, maybe 1 or 2 Christmas presents. I want to take that person and make them spend £120 a year on Spotify. But how do we get people to let go of the old Vine and reach out to the new Vine? So then in the Summer Olympics 2012 was when I officially transitioned, albeit with a huge chunk of gardening leave, transitioned into the big green streaming machine that was Spotify.
Fantastic. And in terms of the solutions to the problem, do you see yourself as someone that comes up with those and then encourages that change? Because we talk a lot about change and disruption.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, change is largely a good thing, right? And it creates opportunities and progress. So with your role at Spotify, how did it go from, right, this is what needs to happen to let's make it happen?
Sure. So It's quite strange. I was with a very big artist yesterday for lunch, and I got the same question I got back in 2008 when Spotify was beginning to try and license itself in the UK. And the question goes like this: how can Spotify justify half a penny per stream? And you're just thinking, sigh, not again. In your head, you're in a state of despair. Outward facing, externally, you have to perform the same economic duty that you were paid to perform back in 2008, which is education. What did Tony Blair say? Education, education, education. You need to square those three educations to understand how much education this industry needs. And again, I tip my hat to Tileyard for championing education in this business. But to give you and the viewers just a quick example of that, let's go back to that per stream debate, which I'm sure everyone watching will be aware of and is probably feels a bit disgruntled by. How can you justify half a penny per stream? So let's do some quick maths, very simple maths. If Nick Kane's hit song, you did write hits.
I can't say I wrote them. I mimed to them for about 3 years.
Lip-synced hits was performed on the BBC Radio 2 breakfast show, which is the most valuable form of exploitation in Britain today, Zoe Ball's Radio 2 show. The songwriter would receive £90 and the artist would receive £60. Add them together, that's £150 for a play. How can you justify half a penny per stream when one play on Radio 2 gets £150? Now, I don't want to lose you in the arithmetic here, but we're going to have to do some, so stay with me. The £150 is for a broadcast, is for one-to-many. 8 million people listen to the Radio 2 breakfast show. So you take £150, divided by 8 million, and you get 0.00004. Spotify's paying half a penny, a lot more. Let me square it for you. If those 8 million people who heard that Nick Kane's classic song that you wrote back in the 90s on Radio 2 were to then go to Spotify and stream it on their way to work, you would get 40,000 from Spotify. And that's a distinction of what the per stream means. It's not a one-to-many model of broadcast, which we've had for 70 years. It's a one-to-one value of streaming. And since 2008, I have been explaining that to managers who have held me by the neck in anger. And every time I explain it, they let go of my neck, put me back on the floor, and offer to buy me a pint. But it's so important you keep hammering these fundamental lessons home.
Well, it's compelling, and the way and again, it's very clearly explained, and actually, it answers some questions and actually removes the sort of the focus on the negative, doesn't it?
And it's hard. I'm not snobbish or arrogant about it. If you're an artist or a songwriter or an executive in this business, nobody's experienced the change music's had. Trying to keep up is hard, but education, it just never. It's like painting the fourth railway bridge. As soon as you finish teaching one party, you have to teach another. It's constantly educating this industry.
Absolutely. So we're kind of in the mid-teens now. I want to talk about your book, Tarzan Economics. Interesting title. I confess I haven't read it, which is disgraceful, and I promise you I will after this, because
it's a quick read from it. Everyone's told me it's a quick read.
Great, and maybe I've been put off because I didn't think I'd be able to understand it. What was the inspiration behind the book?
So you go back to where this conversation began, the belief my father had in showing me how to teach economics from a very young age, seeing how people responded so well to it. At Spotify, I took it upon myself to write the economics introduction to the induction program. We were hiring 80 people a month. It'd be good if they understood the economics of the business they were joining into. So I would always travel up to Stockholm and teach 80 new faces about the economics of the business. And you get this incredible feedback saying, I'm using those lessons every day. I'm using terms like a rising tide lifts all boats every day. And you gave me the economics to show how a rising tide can lift all boats. So that passion for education and that realization of seeing how it could make a difference. Once Spotify had IPO'd on the New York Stock Exchange in April 2018, albeit with a Swiss flag being flown outside. They got the country of origin wrong. As with the team at the time when we phoned up and said, we're a Swedish company.
That happens all the time. I often say to people, my wife's half Swedish, which she is, and they say, oh, it's brilliant, really great mountains. It's like, I think you got the country confused. And there are some small mountains in Sweden. Anyway, yeah.
But yeah, so once that point I've got past, I was really keen to do what I always wanted to do, was to write the book and teach at scale. It's our grandmother always said to us, blessed be the one who giveth. If I can give this book out, there'll be people I'll never get to meet who will benefit from an economics crash course in media. And that seems to be happening a lot. So the book was called Tarzan Economics, an expression I owe to a tech philosopher and futurologist called Jim Griffin, who gave the image of Tarzan. Don't imagine me as being butt naked swinging through the jungle here, but how businesses, institutions, people hold onto the old vine of doing things, inertia, reluctance to change, and they're frightened to reach out to the new. Hold that thought. For 10 years, music industry fought change, believing kids would go back to buying CDs and downloads. We spent millions on litigation. We lost billions in revenue during that 10 years. The second 10-year block, we embraced change, and now music is the envy of every other media vertical in the world. Everybody's asking, how did you do it? So what my book does is it teaches anybody else staring at their Napster moment, when they're staring into darkness, when they're looking at their entire industry being upended, here's 8 lessons you can use to avoid the suffering and get straight to the recovery.
So it's a transferable kind of list of kind of lessons learned that you could transfer into other sectors, other.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, an obvious one, and it's ironic to tell you this here as we're close to King's Cross Station. King's Cross for Scottish people is the gateway to London. King's Cross, prior to the development that you and your colleagues have been part of, was not the nicest place to be. So it's a bit like climatising for folk from Glasgow. But still, you came into King's Cross. What was the one thing you saw at the station? A newsagent, a huge W.H. Smith's newsagent. And I've had to meet various chiefs of newspaper titles around the world. One of the observations I give them was, did you notice that when we rebuilt King's Cross, not just the biggest train station in Britain, but the biggest concourse in Britain, we didn't have space for a newsagent.
Interesting.
There was no W.H. Smith. Since the time of the Victorians, newsagents and train stations were hip to hip. Now we have train stations without newsagents. And if you're in the business of newspapers and magazines, that's your Napster moment. And I could go across many institutions, government, private sector, not-for-profits who are staring at their Napster moment. My book is for them.
Amazing. You mentioned something. I've seen snippets of the books. I did a little bit of research, tiny bit of research. Great story you told about how streaming has changed the way songs are now written.
Yeah.
And that was a great story. So I think you gave Streets Have No Name, U2 as a great example.
Yeah.
Long intro. To maybe retell that story. It was
I love how you picked up on the U2 reference as well. So we noticed something happening at Spotify quite early on in the nature of hits were getting shorter. Now, in the 70s, songs may have lasted more than 4 minutes. In the 80s and 90s, maybe it was the higher 3 minutes. Into the noughties, lower 3 minutes. Today, Nick, most hits today last 2 minutes, 20 seconds, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. They're getting shorter, and the chorus of these songs is getting shunted to the front. So if you look at a lot of hits coming out today, they don't begin with a guitar intro and a verse and a bridge and a chorus. They start with the chorus. And the example I gave there was U2. Quick joke, what's the difference between God and Bono? God doesn't think he's Bono. So if you look at U2, I think their greatest song is Where the Streets Have No Name. I think it's 2 minutes and 8 seconds before you hear Bono's voice. That's a long build-up guitar introduction, the edge with all those guitar pedals working, 2 minutes, 8 seconds before the actual chorus kicks in. If you look at Old Town Road, that faded out after 2 minutes, 8 seconds. Do you think the Gen Z millennials of today are going to wait 2 minutes, 8 seconds before the hook? No. Yeah. Don't bore us. Get us to the chorus.
Yeah. Prog rock wouldn't work anymore, would it?
Yes, correct. And then maybe that's a good thing. But then you go from the culture, the show, to the economics, the business. Why is this happening? Well, it might just be the nature of attention spans today, but there might be something more. The rules of streaming, the tail, is changing the game. It's wagging the dog. The rules say you don't get paid unless you've been played for 30 uninterrupted seconds. So it makes absolute intuitive sense to start with the chorus. Avicii was doing this in 2013. Yeah. Hit the chorus, I don't care if you skip after 31 seconds, I got paid.
Amazing.
Secondly, you don't get paid a penny more for lasting a second more. There's no duration. So why write longer songs? So canny, rational economic songwriters write shorter songs beginning with the chorus. Now you might think, wow, but streaming is destroying culture. This is terrible news. A key premise of the book with this example and 100 more is we've been here before, we've been here again. Do you remember that wonderful organization that used to run the underworld of America called the Mafia? Used to, I think, past tense. They ran jukeboxes in America. And when they ran jukeboxes, they stipulated that no song that lasted more than 2 minutes, 30 seconds was allowed inside a jukebox. Hence Motown. Motown worked with jukeboxes. That's one of the reasons it was successful. Why? Because jukeboxes are paying for on-demand music, and the shorter the song, the more money I'm going to make.
Or buy another one.
Exactly what's happening on Spotify today.
Born in King's Cross and brewed right here in Tileyard, Two Tribes is one of the fastest growing and most exciting independent beer brands, founded with the creative community front of mind whilst brewing great beer. You'll not only find them in supermarkets and some of your favourite local pubs and restaurants, but in art galleries, festivals and music venues too. Award-winning beer Two Tribes focuses on more than what's in the can or the glass. It's an opportunity to create memorable moments in memorable places with memorable people. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the podcast. Check them out by visiting www.twotribes.co.uk and see what they're up to on Instagram at Two Tribes Brew. Please always drink responsibly.
I think we must have been visionaries. The one hit we had, Say It Once, Ultra, you heard it here. We produced by Ian Stanley, Tears for Fears, and Steve Robson, who's gone on to
legends.
So that it was the one. It was the Turkey album. Everything else they made was successful. But we had one big hit, number one, and I can remember vividly. They flipped the chorus to the beginning, so we started with the chorus in 1997. Well, and it was a hit in several countries. So it's interesting. Maybe we were pioneers without realising it.
You have to re-release it.
Yeah, it's perfect for streaming.
By the way, you might find a new fan base with today's TikTok generation. I mean, just down the road, we have a stadium called the Emirates, home of Arsenal. Last year, the band The Arctic Monkeys played there twice. And I'm paraphrasing and I'm generalising here, but bear with me. The first night was people like ourselves in our 40s, remember them from MySpace, and stayed with them ever since. The second night was predominantly teenage girls who discovered them on TikTok, and all they knew was 34 seconds of each song.
That's brilliant.
If you stick around after the chorus, we're going to sing another verse. It's called a composition, people.
It's really interesting where we sort of talk about creativity and we talk about economics.
Yeah.
Do you think which one comes first? Does the creativity drive the economics,
Yes.
or does the economics drive the creativity?
I believe the creativity drives economics. I really do, and it has to stay that way. I like to try and juggle that in my head. I really hate myself if I'm giving advice to a songwriter or an artist or an industry executive which starts with the economics without considering the creativity. It's like a chicken and egg question, but I really do believe it's creativity, determines the tune, and it's the economics which does the dancing.
Are they mutually exclusive, or is there a relationship between the two? So is it a case if you're trying to write a hit now, clearly you need to understand the economics to write a hit, but then you got to write the hit. So it's nuanced, but do you see it as being intertwined? Yeah, the ones that understand both have a better chance at success.
Absolutely, and that goes back to my belief in education. Like just simple things like, why does an album have 9 songs? Maybe that's a creative-driven proposal, which I think a body of work should have 9 songs. Or maybe there's economics there. Due to this complex thing called the penny rate in publishing, it's not worth having any more songs. So you can see right there, a very creative decision is actually underpinned by economics. It's very important for songwriters, artists, labels, publishers to understand both.
Yeah.
You need two to tango.
Absolutely. I agree. Okay, we talked about the past.
Mm-hmm.
What about the present and the future? So what are you working on at the moment, Will? And where is all of this going? Where do you see the industry at the moment? Where do you see it going?
So what I'm working on just now and where I see it going can be sort of merged into one here. I'm working on an annual report, which has been doing now for 9 years. It's a passion project. It's driven through a desire of education, and it simply asks one very obvious, intuitive question, which up until doing this work, nobody else could ask or answer. What's copyright worth? That's 3 words. What's this C with a circle actually valued at? And nobody knew. You can point to the IFPI, which is a trade body for record labels, and say their yearbook says 26 billion. That's labels. That's just part of the puzzle. What about the songwriters and the publishers and the collecting societies? What if you got all these 3 pieces of the jigsaw and integrated them into one and said, that's the value of copyright? And when I first did this, their answer was 25 billion. It was a top story in music business worldwide. I think it got over 100,000 hits, which is way more than a big story would typically get. And there was an appetite for saying, this weird Scottish fella has worked it out for us. He's done the hard work, so we didn't have to.
Yeah.
And then you can have proper dialogues of like, what share of that copyright value goes to the label and the artist? And what share goes to the songwriter and the publisher? And is that fair? That's a very important debate which we're having in the UK just now, which is what's a fair division of royalties. So this year's total actually reaches $45.7 billion. That means it's closer to 50 billion than it is 40. Can you imagine the music industry is going to be a $50 billion business soon? Easily before the next Olympics. And the interesting story here is that music, the sick man of media, the one that was laughed at, you're dead, you're dinosaurs, you're suing the consumer, is now worth more than cinema.
Wow, it's amazing. I mean, what the other thing I've always thought of, I mean, I suppose from experience from back in our days where we had hits in other countries, typically the artists that sort of dominated the charts, which again is another moot point because how relevant are the charts these days? Very much sort of America, UK was so influential worldwide. But we're in an era now where we've got artists from all around the world, from, you know, amazing scene coming out of Africa. Do you think that's I mean, it clearly feels like a good thing for the industry with all this amazing music from all around the world. But I guess the spin-off of that is very hard now to have a hit. Where do you see in terms of the British industry and UK artists?
We're in trouble. I'm not going to put lipstick on a pig now. I think the British music industry is in trouble. I think what Tileyard is doing, what's happening at the grassroots level is admirable, but, you know, how do you stand above the crowd? You know, I always like the expression, the room is getting increasingly crowded and I can't speak to the people at the back. We're in a really tight spot, but what you're alluding to is going to ask me to pronounce the G word, which was invented, by the way, downstairs in this building 18 months ago. If I can give you a little bit of context here before we get into this, the BBC One show came to Tileyard to interview me on the release of the paperback of my book. It was called Tarzan Economics. It had to be retitled Pivot because W.H. Smith Travel and Hudson Travel said, books with economics in their title don't sell at airports.
Right.
So get rid of that title, get rid of that cover, come back with something fresh, and we'll stock it. We'll even put it on our table. They loved the book, they just didn't love the title. So we retitled it Pivot. I remember on the day of release, I was flying to South by Southwest, and my flight was delayed by 6 hours. So I went to every W.H. Smith at Heathrow Airport, and they kept their promise.
Fantastic.
So you can buy it in airports. In fact, I got a
you
photograph.
bought a few copies, did you?
Spike your own sales, treat your own books. I actually got a photograph yesterday from a person in Bali, took a picture of my book in the airport in Bali. So
amazing.
It's travel.
Fantastic.
But yeah, so I came here to promote it, and the BBC One show had this great family feel-good story. They said, hey, Will, isn't it great that last year, 2022, the top 10 artists in Britain were all British. What a great result for British music. First time in 60 years we had a clean sweep on the top 10. And I made an idiot of myself in the interview because I said, not really. If you look across Europe, the top 10 in Germany were all German. The top 10 in France were all French. The top 40 in Italy were all Italian. The top 10 are all Spanish language, but all Latin American. This is not a British thing. This is a European thing. Yeah. Huge gulps on the sofa of the One show. Didn't do my book sales any favour. But I'm like a dog on heat when I see confusion. Why did he say that when we gave him a nice, easy softball question? Why did he gulp? Why was the reaction the way it was? So we set about publishing a paper for the London School of Economics, where I'm a fellow, called Glocalization, which in a simple sentence says this: the world isn't flat anymore. If it was, we'd all be listening to American bands singing in English and championing the business, which we've had for 70 years. And the British bands got an easy run from that. Now, local artists are getting to the top of their local charts in their local mother tongue. And the English language is not going to find it easy anymore.
What's the key then for an emerging UK artist now to have a global hit? Can they have a global hit?
Well, I always introduce the subject, and I've had to address the heads of all the big US tech companies on this. I mean, this thing has gone viral. It's now part of the lexicon. Only last week, there was a huge global sports conference in Singapore. Sports, nothing to do with me. Titled The Glocalization of Sport, with a picture of me in the program notes. I mean, this was just a flimsy LSE discussion paper. Now it's become part of anthropology. What do you do? Well, I've always stressed that this country hasn't produced a true global pop star since Dua Lipa in 2017. And Nick, you know this industry better than me. If you wish to challenge me and prove me wrong, I have a bottle of Glendronach 15-year revival whiskey that will give anyone who can prove that statement wrong. So far, nobody's able to do it. What about the 1975? That was 2016. What about Harry Styles? For Christ's sake, that's 2011. Since 2017, this country, which used to produce pop stars all the time, and Adele, Coldplay, We haven't produced nothing.
Is that fixable? I mean, obviously the majors seem to be cutting back on creative. They're making a lot of money, so they have shareholders to kind of to please. Is there an argument they're not investing like they used to? Is that the problem, do you think, or is there another problem?
I think there's another problem. I think if you want to know where this can't end up, you have to go down under and look at Australia, another English-speaking country which is not American, and you'll see why those two observations are crucial. I think Australia now has gone for 3.5 years with no new Australian artists featured in their album charts. In Britain it's dry, down there it's a drought. And it's worrying because then the wheels of investment begin to unwind. Like, we're not going to take gambles anymore. We'll just rest on American artists. A bird in the hand is worth more than two in the bush. If I've got Olivia Rodrigo touring in Australia, why should I invest in an up-and-coming band from Brisbane or Sydney? And I'm worried that that's the trajectory that we are on here in the UK, and there needs to be a lot of work done to change it. I think what we're seeing is the collapse of human editorial. Nobody's listening to human editorial playlists anymore. In fact, I don't think streaming services, Amazon, Apple, Spotify, is where you go to do discovery anymore. It's where you go to do your listening. Your commute to work playlist, your commute home playlist, probably the same as it was 10 years ago. Sorry, but it's not that fascinating anymore. Discovery happens elsewhere. And in the algorithm, now if the algorithm knows that Nick Keynes is German or Nick Keynes is Danish and he likes German or Danish rock music, it will play you more German and more Danish rock music. But if Nick Keynes is English speaking, it's going to play you American music. And that's the lane that we find ourselves sitting on. If you're non-English speaking, glocalization is a force for good. If you're English speaking and non-American, glocalization is a force for bad.
It's fascinating stuff.
It's
you can give me the answer after the podcast, and then we'll...
And I want to preface my remarks here by saying it's for me as an economist to frame it, but please let an anthropologist or a sociologist step up to the stage and explain it. I don't have that toolkit. They do.
I think what we see here is there's clearly not a lack of talent. Some amazing musicians. We see
music is here.
See it coming through. So I think it's really a case of the industry sort of slightly rebooting. It feels to me like a moment where it's ripe for disruption, which is your specialist subject.
Yeah.
Have you got an answer that you could share that you think could be a game changer in the next 2 to 3 years?
I'll come at it two ways. I think part of the problem and part of the solution is a very inconvenient truth. If you look at who are the global pop stars coming through today, and when I mean global pop stars, let's use the age-old expression, household names.
Because I was going to ask you the definition of that, because how would you define a
If
a
one of 3
star?
teenage girls could sing you a lyric, I'm with it. Now, I would argue that the true global pop stars coming through today are not coming through major labels, nor indies, nor the DIY platform. They're coming from Disney. Olivia Rodrigo, Sabrina Carpenter, two of the hottest names. Ariana Grande, she's on cycle right now as well. You can go back to Justin Timberlake if you want. Disney is the boot camp which produces. And I saw Olivia Rodrigo perform live. And one of the things my dad also did was stage production for the Edinburgh Festival. Genius performance, military precision, knowing exactly where you need to be 2 minutes, 11 seconds into this song, which hand should be held aloft, which position of the stage you should be in. Disney's like boot camp. They're able to do it, record labels are not. And that's an inconvenient truth where we have to, in Scotland, we have this rather uncouth expression, eat our own dog food. So whatever Disney is doing seems to be working. Can you do a Disney? I don't know. I think the other thing that Britain needs to do, and I'm going to switch lanes from the recorded sector to another part of the industry which Tileyard champions and houses. It's what makes the chemistry of this campus so incredible. You don't know where the business is going, but you know where it's housed. It's housed up on York Way behind King's Cross at a place called Tileyard. It's to look at the live sector. Now in Britain, the live sector has been struck by this phenomena, which I've coined the expression, go big or stay home. If I said to Nick Keynes, hey Nick, do you want to come to Camden on a wet Wednesday night in November and come and see this up-and-coming band? It's 10 quid on the door, the beer's watered down, the toilets stick to the bottom of your feet, and they're on stage at 9. You'd probably say, no, I'll watch Netflix. Hey, Nick, do you want to go and see Blur at Wembley? It's £160 a ticket. T-shirts are £65. You're probably going to spend £100 on food and bev on the night. You fancy it? Where do I sign? Why, as music fans, are we not taking gambles on the grassroots? Yet we're happy to spend multiple more on established acts. We go big or we stay home. And I think the attention really has to be drawn to that dynamic, because when I moved to London, young, free, single, alcoholic and irresponsible, I lived in Camden, Kentish Town. I still do.
There's still a few of those now, Will.
But we used to have 6 music venues in Kentish Town High Street. We had the Bull and Gate, which is where Coldplay did their famous shows.
Yeah.
Now we have none. I mean, 0. Nul point. We have nothing. And Camden's going the same way. So I'm worried about that conveyor belt in the live scene. That's where work needs to be done. And Tileyard could take a positive step to help raise awareness of that. We don't have the places to hone your skills, to stop being boring on stage, to take gambles. We need that back.
Yeah, we have a resident here, a resident business called Talent Bank. You probably know Ray and Pablo.
Incredible people.
They champion grassroots artists.
It's where it begins.
And it's the energy and the passion they put into it, and it works.
Yeah,
and in
were
fact,
you at the Camden Chapel last night? No, I wasn't. Oh my goodness, you missed the concert of a lifetime. That conversation we used to have around the water cooler every day, now we're having like once or twice a year, and I worry about that.
And I think then that comes through relationships and communities, and I hope that's why Tileyard is still going strong, and hopefully is going to continue to go strong for many years, because we've got great people here collaborating and working together, and I feel that might be the answer.
Let me tell you what the chemistry of Tileyard is, so your audience can really appreciate it. I always have said this. The internet, that thing which shocked our lives in the 90s, the internet can scale just about anything, but it can never scale intimacy. And what you get at Tileyard is intimacy. You can see bands being formed in the beer garden. You can see businesses being started in Vinyl Cafe because it's intimate. But this is an exception. It needs to become the rule. Up and down the country.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely drink to that. Well, thank you so much for today. It's fascinating talking to you. We could keep going all day. We'll have you back in the next series, but thanks so much, Will Page.
Thank you, Nick Keynes, and thank you to the whole team here at Tileyard.
Thanks for listening to The Secret Sauce with me, Nick Keynes. If you love this episode, make sure you go to tileyard.com to find out more about this amazing community, and catch us next time for more insider stories from the heart of Tileyard. Until then, stay creative and keep an ear out for the next big thing coming your way. As always, recorded at TYX Studios.